This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we're fortunate tonight to have as our guest a non-politician. Just like last week, we had Lee Greenwood, who was a singer. We've got an academician, a PhD, and a lawyer, and everything else. Dr. Alan Mendenhall. We're good to have you on the show, Alan.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for having me on.
He is an academician. We had Alan on the show. How many years ago when you were at Faulkner?
I would say this was 2016 or 17.
Before COVID then, wasn't it?
It was well before COVID.
Now, you were at Faulkner.
I was.
You were teaching law school
I was in the law school, so I was Associate Dean of Thomas Good Jones School of Law.
That's right.
And Executive Director of something called the Blackstone and Burke Center for Law and Liberty, which did judicial education for principally judges, state court judges. And we did that the entire time I was there, and unfortunately, the Blackstone and Burke Center folded when I left for Troy in August 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic.
Well, when you say that, was that something that the University of Alabama Law School had formerly done, or who paid y'all for teaching the judges and everything? How'd y'all get paid? Or
Well, I would write grants typically. So
okay.
I would write a grant, and each grant would be for a seminar. And we would only host about one of those per year, but then we would do other educational programming, and I ran something called the Sir Edward Cook Fellowship Program for students. That was specifically for law students. And they would undertake reading groups, sort of extracurricular reading groups and activities, and I would take them around to the State House and take them up to the courts and have them meet the judges and justices. And that was a really fulfilling job, and I enjoyed my time at Faulkner, loved my colleagues. I loved working for a Christian institution, but had a really great opportunity to join Troy and to be in a business school, and so I jumped on that.
Well, let's go back to where your childhood was and everything. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Atlanta, raised in Marietta, Georgia. My mom's from Opelika.
Oh, she's from Opelika.
She's from Opelika.
But don't you still have a home over in Lee County?
I do. I live in, well, I have a home, right now I have a home in Auburn and Helena, but principally Auburn. That's my main home. And Auburn is where my parents went to school, all my grandparents went there.
So your mama was from Opelika. Was your daddy from Alabama too?
He's from Columbus, right on the other side of the border.
Same thing. So you're right there, born in Columbus, Phoenix
right.
City, and Opelika area.
Yeah, and my grandparents were born in Alabama. In fact, my maternal grandfather was born in Atmore, and my maternal grandmother was born in Opelika.
So your maternal grandmother and your paternal grandmother was born at Atmore. Your mama was born in Opelika. So that's 2 or 3 generations you've been in Lee County.
Oh my!
Well, that's your home then.
It's gone back more than 2 or 3 generations.
How many generations you go back in Lee County?
Oh, I don't know if I could just throw the number out there, but it's several. My family on the Glenn side was involved in the founding of East Alabama Male College, which was a private Methodist school. Ended up being an abysmal failure. But after the Morrill Act, when the legislature was looking at where to put a land-grant institution, they decided they were going to do it in Tuscaloosa, where the University of Alabama was. But the legislature went out of session, and some of the legislators stayed behind and pulled a bunch of shenanigans and put it in Lee County, actually acquired East Alabama Male College, the private Methodist school, to make this public institution, which was Alabama Agricultural and Mechanical College, which became Alabama Polytechnic Institute, which became Auburn University. So my family history goes back
that far.
Goes back that far.
Wow,
it sure does.
That's probably why you live over there then.
It is. It feels like home.
Because that's your roots right there.
It's not where I grew up, but it's where I spent a lot of my childhood. I went to all kinds of tailgates and funerals and weddings and family reunions.
Would you go to school at Auburn?
I got my PhD at Auburn.
But you get your undergraduate degree where?
I went to Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina.
Great schools up there.
It's a beautiful place, a good school. It's one of those Duke endowed schools, Duke Davidson, Furman.
Yeah.
I had great faculty. I have great memories.
What'd you major in?
English. So I studied English, ended up going all the way through and getting a PhD in English. But
right there with the same time, but you got your PhD at Auburn.
I got my PhD at Auburn, yeah, and did law school at West Virginia University, and then a master's in law at Temple University in Philadelphia. So Done a lot of different things, Steve.
Wow. But I didn't know you had that kind of deep roots to Lee County in Alabama
I sure did.
over there.
Yeah.
No wonder you live over there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place
You
to
got
be.
ancestors buried and everything over there, don't you?
I sure do.
You ever go see their graves or anything?
You know, my cousin, she was my grandmother's first cousin, Joanne Smith T, would take me to those cemeteries and point out who was who, because a lot of the names are unfamiliar to me.
Who would know? They don't know.
Yeah,
I can take my children, but my children don't seem interested in it.
Well, it's interesting to me. I wish I had a better possession of the genealogy, but right now I still have relatives that can fill the gaps for me, but I'm going to have to learn it myself, or otherwise it'll be lost.
What about, do you ever take your children over there and tell them about your ancestors and everything? How old are your children?
I have a son who's 12, a daughter who's 10.
That puts him in the 7th grade.
He's in the 7th grade.
Uh-huh.
He's in the 7th grade, and then a daughter who's 10, and then a son who's 6, and then I've got one on the way.
Have you? Sure enough.
Yeah, I've got
well,
one.
Well, you're young.
oven.
You're not 40 years old, are you?
I'm 40. That's right.
That's young. Well, now then you, after you got through with all that, Furman undergraduate in English, and then graduate school at Auburn, law school at West Virginia, and then master's in law from Temple. Then where was your first occupation, working professional work?
Well, I did a short stint at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., but as an adjunct legal associate, so I was working remotely. I practiced law in Atlanta. I did private practice there and realized that this was actually, I was practicing while doing my doctoral dissertation, and I realized you can't bill hours and finish a doctoral dissertation. And it just so happened that I was at lunch with a group of attorneys in Atlanta, and I got an email on my cell phone. Ding, my phone dings. I look at it, and it was an email from then Justice Tom Parker, saying, "Alan, please call me." And I thought, that's an odd.
How did you know him? You didn't know
him? Family connections, but
because his wife's got Lee County roots.
She does.
She's a James.
Yeah, so Dottie's mom actually was responsible for bringing my grandmother to Christ. So there is a family connection.
Well, Tom and I are best friends.
Oh, really?
We went to Boy State together.
Oh, you're kidding me.
We're the same age.
Oh, how about that?
He was my campaign manager when I ran for governor of Boy State in 1968 or 69. He was in school at Sidney Lanier, and I was in school at Charles Henderson High School in Troy.
Oh, how about that?
We've been friends since then.
Well, it's funny. He's, my relationship with Justice Parker goes back a long way, and he and Lynn Stewart, who is actually also my cousin.
So Lynn's your cousin.
She's my cousin. They were both at my wedding, and then they ended up running against each other for that Chief Justice seat a few years back.
Did Lynn run against Tom? I'd forgotten
they
about
did.
that.
They ran against each other. She was appointed by the governor to the position.
That's right. That's right.
And then Chief Justice Parker.
Is Lynn retired?
She's retired.
She was a circuit judge a long time in Baldwin County.
She was, and she was on the Supreme Court for a long time as well.
Yeah, I've got a picture of me and Lynn on my wall.
Oh, how about that?
And me and Tom, too. I got several pictures of me and Tom and Dottie.
Yeah.
I got a political wall all over my house just about.
I bet you've met a lot.
Anyway, but so you and Tom wrote you when you were at the Cato Institute and wanted you to do what?
Well, this is when I was in private practice, and he said, call me. And so I got back from lunch. I thought that was unusual, and I called him.
Was he on the court then?
He was on the court then. And he said, Roy Moore is going to run for office. Would you be interested in working for him? And I thought, wow, this is unexpected. I didn't know he was running. And I said, well, yeah, I would be. And long story short, I ended up being a staff attorney for Roy Moore for about 3 years, and then went over and worked for Luther Strange in the AG's office. So again, two men who ran against each other. I was the only one who had worked for both of them. And then I went from Luther's office to Faulkner, so I made that jump into academia.
From Luther and Attorney General's office to Faulkner.
That's right.
So how long were you at Faulkner?
Oh gosh, 4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
Did you teach too?
I did. I taught in the law school, the English department, and the humanities department. So I had a nice breadth.
Well, what department claimed you? What department? I mean, did the law school claim you, or did it loan you out of the English, or what?
The law school was my chief position. But I taught in humanities, I taught in English because I just enjoyed teaching those subjects. I'm really a literary guy at bottom.
Well, yeah, you majored in English.
I majored in English. Law is what I do and what I was trained to do, but literature is more of what I was designed to do. And of course, I just finished my first novel.
Before we get into that novel, let's talk about your transition from Faulkner to Troy. I
Sure.
want to know about all your Troy position
Yeah.
with the School of Business and everything, because we're on Troy University Television. What year did you move from Faulkner to Troy? Because I followed it, but I can't keep up with the years.
It was August 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic.
Did Dr. Hawkins want you to come and do leadership, or what did?
Well, I got hired to run the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy. So I'm a big free market person.
You know, Manny and I grew up together.
I did not know that,
I
actually.
saw him at the Troy ball game the other day.
Well,
we sat together at the Troy in the president's box.
I heard he was there, and I didn't know he was coming.
We
Otherwise,
sat together the whole time and reminisced about time. We grew up around the corner from each other. Manny grew up next door to Wiley Sanders.
How about that?
Have I ever told you that?
No one's told me that.
He's got a couple of older sisters, and Wiley's about 10 years old. Manly's 2 years older than me. But Troy was not like it. None of that stuff about the university was there. They're just old Troy, where I live now. Was Maple Street, where I lived, and then Orange Street was where Manly grew up. And Wiley Sanders grew up right next to Manly.
Oh, how about that?
Right next door.
How about
but now, Manly didn't know Wiley much growing up. Wiley was 10 years older than Manly.
Okay.
But half our high school football team came off that Orange Street. If you name, Manly was a heck of a football player.
Well, I was going to ask that.
He was a good football player, and I was okay, but we had a good football program at Troy High School, Charles Henderson. But Manny was a great football player.
He was
and
great
he and Al
economist.
Head were there. You know Al, who was head of the Arts Council
Yeah,
for years?
sure.
He and Al were on the same football team.
You're kidding me.
Al was a high school all-state quarterback and was a little all-American quarterback at Troy.
Well,
he followed Sim Bird.
I'm going to have to text Manley after this.
Manny and our best friend. We spent the whole time and talked. His older sister Joe Harville.
Yeah.
Was sat there and we talked about Troy and growing up in Troy and how the stadium was built by Joe Frank Walters and some Troy men. And anyway, we sat there and talked about that the whole time. But Manny looks great.
Yeah, he's doing very well, and he's sharp, and I know he's enjoying his farm.
As we talked, and I said, "Where do you live?" He said, "Lives on a farm." And I said, "What do you got exercise do you do?" He said, "I got an Olympic-sized pool." I said, "Well, do you swim?" He says, "No, I had a daughter who was an Olympic swimmer."
Oh.
And she lives in California now.
I didn't know
So he
that.
keeps a big pool next to his house on his farm up there in Virginia. I think it is in Virginia.
That's right.
So how did we get off on Manly? About him?
Well, because I run the Manuel H. Johnson Center,
Okay.
so I've got kind of two hats. I'm Associate Dean of the Business School and then Executive Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center. When I first got to Troy, I was doing a lot more in that Associate Dean role, but now the bulk of my time is working on the Johnson Center activities, hosting educational programming, recruiting graduate students into the MA program in economics, running something called the Free Enterprise Scholars Program for undergraduates, and just in general being a promoter of markets.
Does Judson just does academic stuff that mostly, doesn't he?
Judson is the sort of the head honcho of the business
Judson
school,
Edwards,
so he oversees all facets of the business school.
What
So
is
there's-
Judson's background? Is he he has a PhD, doesn't he?
He does. He has a PhD, and it's in. He's an economist, and he works in sort of. He does economic development and works in that field.
Oh, does he?
He does.
Where did he grow up? Do you remember? Where
He
is
grew
from?
up he went to Smith Station, so
Oh, did he?
over there in that
that
kind
area
of
over there.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was Alabama born.
He is. Yeah, sure is.
So did he go to? He didn't go to undergraduate school at Troy. Did
He did. He went to undergrad.
So he's a Troy person.
He is. Yeah. For many years, he lived down at the beach somewhere in Destin and commuted up, and that sounds improbable, but I live in Auburn. It takes me an hour and a half to get there. Well, it only takes an hour and a half to get there from Destin too, so it's not.
Is that all? Hour and a half?
It doesn't. It's not that hard to do. People do it. He's not the only one that does it.
So Judson actually lives mostly in Destin still.
Well, I think he's since moved back up to Troy and is spending most of his time in Troy now. But he may still have a house down in Destin.
Where did Judson go to graduate school? Do you know?
I think it was Southern Miss. Or
He's
Southern Miss,
been head of the business school for years.
a long time. He was dean at like I want to say 38.
I'm thinking he was real young. Yeah.
And I think he's about to turn 50. May have just turned 50.
And y'all work closer together.
We do. Yeah, Judson's a good friend. I knew Judson before I got to Troy. We were both members of something called the Philadelphia Society, which is an organization founded in 1964 by a bunch of conservative luminaries, people like Russell Kirk, Milton Friedman, Ed Fulner, and it meets twice a year to debate and discuss. It's a society, so it takes no actual positions. It actually likes to hold disparate positions on the right intention with each other, and the whole purpose is to bring people together to dialogue about, pressing matters. And so
I've
Judson
heard of
and
that,
I,
Philadelphia.
yeah, it's sort of a big organization. It's been around, as I said, since 1964. We've got an anniversary coming up next year, and that celebration will be in Tampa. And Judson is a member of that, and I'm a member of that. So we knew each other through that. And then just when you're in Alabama and you run in certain circles, you always come across people, and we sort of crossed paths. And he was the one that had the initial idea for me to move to Troy. And
so he approached you about it then? He was the one talking about it.
We did a little program here in Montgomery, and he was in the audience. And after the program, he said, "Why don't we go get dinner?" And we went up to Firebirds up there, and he
in Birmingham, you mean?
No, the one up here at Eastern Boulevard.
That's right.
And he asked me if I would be interested in coming, and I said, "Well, yeah." I hadn't thought about it. I just thought we were going to dinner. I didn't know he had an agenda. But
he actually had thought about it before.
Yeah, he had thought about it beforehand, and
caught you off guard, didn't
a
it?
little bit, yeah, a little bit. And then we got to the point where he was trying to hammer out some details, and I said, "Judson, I'm not prepared to have this conversation right now. I got to go back and think about some things before I could give you answers to those kinds of questions," which I did, and it wasn't that long later when I left Faulkner and joined the faculty.
And
at
this
Troy.
was in 2020.
2020.
So you've been at Troy for about 3 years now.
Yeah, a little over 3 years. A little over 3 years.
You like it too, aren't you?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it. Chancellor Hawkins is a great leader. The administration is doing a good job. I enjoy being in a business school. As someone who's a lawyer with a PhD in English, a business school is an unusual habitat. But
I bet he wants you to come over and teach some classes on leadership, doesn't he?
Well, I did teach a leadership class in the MBA program for the first 2 years I was there, and now I've shifted to business law. I'm teaching mostly business law courses.
But you do some recruiting too and some talk.
I sure do. Yeah. We've recruited some graduate students from the Universidad de Francisco Marroquín in Guatemala lately. That's a new source of students for us.
Well, let me ask you this question. So this is your first book?
My first novel. This
is
8th book.
Okay,
let's
talk about your other previous books then.
Okay.
But mostly academic books, right?
Mostly academic books. So there's one book called Of Bees and Boys, Lines from a Southern Lawyer, and that's creative nonfiction. Those are just essays. And then the rest of them are mostly academic books. For example, I repurposed my doctoral dissertation on Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. into a book that was published by Bucknell University Press. And I did a book on jurisprudence and things like that. But I'm really proud of the novel. I actually started writing this before I started writing any of the other 7 books. But it took me that long, and this is by far the shortest.
Well, it's a very small book.
It's very small. It's a short book, but I started writing it first. I just was so busy and finishing graduate school and working on other books and other projects that I just had to fit in a little work here, or a paragraph here, a paragraph there, and then 6 months would go by and I wouldn't touch it.
Let me look at it.
Sure.
It's called A Looming Peace This Morning.
A
Glooming Peace This Morning. Out of Mendenhall, right here. Let me look at just a second. Let's see the start of it. Oh, you've already written me an inscription in here.
I sure did.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Magnolia County.
Magnolia County.
It starts off there. Now, tell me about how you got there. Is it about the Old South, or what is this about?
It is a Southern Gothic version of Greek tragedy. So it's based on it's a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. A Glooming Peace This Morning is actually a phrase from Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, is it?
It sure is. And so this is patterned off books like To Kill a Mockingbird, in which there is a legal case in the backdrop, but it follows the story of a bunch of young boys, so it's a coming-of-age novel. They're Cephas, Lump, Brett, and Michael, and Michael has a sister named Sarah. Brett has a brother named Tommy. Tommy is what we'd call mentally handicapped, and he and Sarah end up having a controversial relationship, I'll put it that way, and that's what's at the heart of the trial. So the story explores certain themes like individualism versus collectivism. You'll see references to the mob, or to the multitude, or to the masses, and collective units, because the town tends to think as a collective unit. but you'll also see sort of more traditional Southern Gothic themes, such as you know, the underbelly of the genteel society, the haunting effects of racism and violence and industrialization. And the book is, I'd say, morally ambiguous. So no character is going to be very righteous, and no character is going to be wholly evil. But there is a lot of ambiguity as to what's right and who is right and who's doing the right thing.
Now, I know this catches my eye, the first chapter, and I have not looked at it, I'm just sitting here. Magnolia County.
Magnolia County.
How southern can you get?
Well, it's.
I mean, this has got to be set in the South.
It is set in the South. It's a fictional, so it's Andalusia is the town, and it's in Magnolia
Now,
County.
do you say it's Andalusia?
I say it's Andalusia, but there's an Andalusia in Georgia, which is where Flannery O'Connor lived. So I was hoping by using the Andalusia name that people might associate the book with
So the
Flannery
city is
O'Connor.
Andalusia, the county is Magnolia County.
And they're purely fictional. However, the setting is based on several different places where I've lived or spent a lot of time. One would be Marietta,
You should
Georgia.
give them a fictional name.
Correct.
You don't call them Marietta.
Right, and it's just an amalgamation of these places. So Marietta, Georgia, Greenville, South Carolina, Morgantown and Fairmont, West Virginia, Opelika.
You call them
innumerable.
different names, but that's who they are.
Well, they're all, I mean, what I have in my mind when I pictured Magnolia County was some feature of each of those places. But the town is against the backdrop of a mountain, sort of a mountainous region. So I kind of have the Helena, you know, image in mind when I picture this Magnolia County. And it's just a mix of places. The Opelika Courthouse is what I have in mind when I describe the courthouse. The old Opelika Courthouse, not the new one.
What you're saying is you really are taking a page from Nell Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Well,
I know you've done a lot of study on that, that subject.
I sure have, and I've written about her. And my grandfather, I mentioned earlier, was born in Atmore, Alabama, but he actually grew up in Monroeville.
He grew up in Monroeville. He knew her.
We knew her very well, and knew Truman Capote when Truman Capote would
They
come
called
in
her
town.
Nell over there.
They called her Nell. That's what he called her. He called her Nell. And they weren't the same age. I can't recall exactly the age difference, but they weren't the same age. But he liked to, you know, point out this, that, and the other thing from Monroeville and say what he believed different settings or people were based on.
That is so interesting because you have to, in the back of your mind, been thinking, because I'd had the same thing. People who grew up with Nell Harper Lee will tell me it is totally an allegory.
Yeah, sure.
They said, I can tell you who every one of these characters are.
Yeah, my grandfather, I sat down.
Same thing.
He made a list.
Bradley was.
I still have a list. Yeah, it was Son Bulwer was the name of the allegedly the name of the real Boo Radley.
So people think she'd being humble when they'd ask her. She wouldn't give me an interview, but she'd say, all I did was write a book. Well, that's really all she did was write a book about her childhood.
Yeah,
it's a total allegory.
Well, and I think when she first took the book to Lippincott Publishers, they said, well, this is great. You got a bunch of really compelling short stories, but they don't hang together. And that's when she took the manuscript back and added the Tom Robinson trial element to the story. In fact, the people that speculate that Truman Capote had a heavy hand in the editing would suggest that he was behind the Tom Robinson part, but I don't buy that for a minute.
And that's what made her
Although
so
Truman Capote is an astounding author.
He is, but I think, and conversely, and that is why one reason why she became so reclusive, she hated the New York media, implying that Truman Capote had something to do with her book. He had succumbed to alcoholism in his latter years. If you see that movie, Capote, it's very accurate.
Sure did.
That she probably wrote in cold blood, if you know the truth about it.
Well, and she did
all the work.
She did a lot of work on that book for him. And
just conversely, isn't it ironic?
That is true.
That
That's
people will say
true.
that. I had Dr. Flynn on my show, Afternoons with Harper Lee. Have you seen his book?
Yeah, I have not seen the book yet.
It's fabulous.
I have got to get that book.
He was the only person she talked to for the last 8 years of her life.
Well, she did. I think she was wise in trusting him. I think he was a reliable.
Yeah, because he wanted nothing out of it.
Right.
And I think she liked his wife too. His wife would come with him.
And she passed away.
She passed away. Yeah. But he was so compelling because I thought this is so interesting. Dr. Flint has written so many good historical books about Alabama political history. Of course, I'm an admirer of him for that reason. But he wrote Afternoons with Harper Lee, and I had him on the show just like I'm having you, 2 or 3 times. We went over he sat there in afternoons, no telling how many hours, with her in that nursing home in Monroeville.
Oh, how
in her
about
latter
that?
years.
How about that?
She tells about everything.
Yeah.
But she was so reclusive.
Yeah, she was. She wasn't like Capote. I mean, Capote loved the limelight.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted the glitz and the glamour.
Well, he was a little cousin from New Orleans in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dill.
He's Dill in the book. I mean,
sure.
So I write a column and it's in the Monroe Journal, you know, and they've been in my, and I would ask them the questions about it, and they would tell me stories. And there was an old man in there right across from me in the Monroe Journal, and I would ask. He was a county historian, like your grandfather, whoever.
Yeah.
You had a relative who grew up with her.
That's
this
right.
man grew up with her.
Yeah, so that's like my grandfather did, and had, of course, his friends from childhood. My grandfather was an interesting man himself. You know, he moved from Monroeville to the Opelika area, which is where my mom grew up, and he went to Auburn. He was actually team captain of the Auburn basketball team in the 50s, and then was in the Air Force in Korea. Actually played basketball for the Air Force. Got drafted by the Lakers, and didn't play professional basketball, but went into business in the executive search business in Atlanta when that was still sort of a budding industry, and always came back to Alabama every year to put flowers on his father's grave in Monroeville.
Well, we've got to do this again because this is going to be. I'm going to read this book and let's come back and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, it's a book that should be banned, by the way. It's not a children's book.
Okay, well it is, y'all. It's a gloomy piece this morning with Dr. Alan Mendenhall, our guest today, and it's set in the South because I can tell you that in the first chapter. It's what was that county? Magnolia County. You're telling the readers right off the bat, it's a Southern book.
It sure is. It is that.
Well, I thank you for being with us, and we thank our viewers for watching, and we hope y'all tune in next week for This Week in Alabama Politics. We may have a politician on next time rather than an author. Thank you, Dr. Mendenhall.
Thank you.
Mm.